Welcome. I think that we always need encouragement. We always need hope, but especially right now in these times. It's just such an unsettling, I think, time for all of us, all over the world. And so we decided to do something really special and different a little bit this week. We decided that we would take some time every day to focus on Jesus and focus on his love and his power, knowing that that will give us such peace and comfort and strength to get through this time. And so, in focusing on that, on his love and his power, we want to focus on his love and power for Mary Magdalene and how that really changed everything. It's inspiring to watch her life. And we think it will help us to prepare to celebrate even this weekend, to celebrate the crucifixion and the resurrection. I mean, it's Easter Sunday that's coming up. And, we celebrate the resurrection every day in our lives as disciples, but the whole world celebrates the resurrection in a lot of ways on this Sunday. And so we thought it'd be a great time to remember what comes with that with that resurrection comes a lot of hope and a lot of just dreams for a new beginning. And right now in this world, that's really, really needed is that and that hope. And so tonight, we're going to begin a series on Mary Magdalene. So if you could turn with me to Luke chapter 8. You can turn with me to Luke chapter 8. I want to read 3 verses that I think really get us started looking at her. So I want to sort of explain why we chose her, and there's some interesting little things about her. In Luke 8, in verse 1, it says, "After this, Jesus traveled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with Jesus, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, called Magdalene, and from whom 7 demons had come out, Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household, Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means." I think that this passage is really amazing. I think for a lot of years, it was nice to sort of read about Mary and know that she was the one that the 7 demons came out of. But I think it's overlooked a lot. And in the last several years, so much has just come into focus in my life about things like this and seeing Jesus from a different perspective. It's like Jesus, I pictured as a young girl growing up, I would have pictured, Jesus and these 12 fellas, and they're like roaming around together. And that's the way I read the Gospels. And that was sort of the picture I had in my mind. But once I really saw this passage and focused on it, it brought things really into focus. And I was able to see that, no, actually, Jesus and the 12 and many women traveled with them. I don't know how many it was. I don't know if it was 5 more, or 8 more, or 10 more, or 20 more. I don't know how many, but it was many more. And he's already named several right here. So other than them, many more. And the women some of them were traveling with him, were supporting them financially. So these were women of means. And I just think about how incredible it was. Jesus had 3 years to sort of have this ministry on earth, and he was teaching the world about God and who God is. And he came in the flesh to show us. And in those 3 years, he could have just, I guess, marched around with 12 guys the way I pictured it. But, that would have been, I think, now hard to show the church how to be when he left. It would have just been a little band of brothers. And that's not the church that he wanted for the world. It was all kinds of people. It was men and women. And even in this little group, he had zealots, and he had women that had 7 demons cast out. And he had all kinds of people within his group that he traveled around with. And I think that has changed my view of even how I read the Bible. It's like when I see when I sort of picture the stories of Jesus as I read, when it says the disciples went here, or I realize it was a group of men and women and all kinds of people, and I just love that. And so that has really helped. But particularly Mary Magdalene, that she is mentioned about a dozen or more times by name in the scriptures, which is really interesting because most of the disciples were never mentioned that often. You almost had to be Peter to be mentioned that. She was mentioned very, very often, usually in lists of people, lists that were at the cross, or lists that were at the tomb, or lists of who was traveling, like here. And so I wanted to sort of focus on her because I really do think that her life is how Jesus affected her life really shows what he can do for us. So anyway, with her, one of the things I was thinking is that I wanted to share that she's had this mistaken identity. Very often, even when you look in some dictionaries, if you look at Magdalene, it says reformed prostitute. How amazing is that? Since the Bible never one time ever mentions anything in her with prostitution, sexuality, nothing about her had anything to do with being a prostitute as far as the Bible says. And yet that has become like this legacy almost that is not really hers. And so I wanted to share a little bit about that. I thought this was interesting because, it always starts somewhere. And usually you don't know where a rumor starts. But actually, on September 14th, 591, Pope Gregory I gave a sermon in Rome, and he mischaracterized her. And he called her a prostitute. And it just stuck. But, this has happened to a lot of women in the Bible. The stories of women, they get sexualized. Whether it's Tamar or Bathsheba, it's interesting the things that we remember about them. And so I think with her, it's good to know that her identity was something that even today is kind of messed up. And we have sometimes trouble with our identity, figuring out sort of who we are and how God sees us. But Jesus really saw her. He saw her, and she was in bad shape. 7 demons, if you think about it, one night this week, we're going to be focusing on that. In fact, tomorrow night, about how she had these 7 demons. And people with demons very often didn't reach out for help, but he helped them anyway. So it wasn't that they were seekers. So tune in tomorrow night for that. But anyway, what I think though is one of the things that I love is that it was nicknames. Some people believe, as I researched her and I read all these different scholars and all these theologians, and some of the people that have studied her believe that Magdalene was a nickname. And, you may say, well, no, that's the town she's from, Magdala. It was a nearby town. And, even when Beth and I talked about this the other day, she, was like, is it the town? I was like, yeah, that's probably it. That's probably what it was. We don't know for sure. But the truth is, people do have a little bit of evidence as to it might have been something else. The word Magdalene means watchtower or fortress. And so, it may have been that that's the nickname he had in mind. Or it also is very similar to a word they use for hairdresser, which might have been why they connected it to prostitute, because sometimes that gets linked. We don't really know, but that I love the idea. My preference is that maybe it was a nickname, because Jesus is kind of known for giving people nicknames that hung around with him, right? Peter was the Rock, And James and John were the sons of thunder. And it's just, there's an interesting part of this, that maybe she was a tower. Maybe she was a tower of strength or a fortress. And maybe that's what he had in mind. Maybe she was tall. Maybe she was really short, and they called her the Tower. You know how the guys in the old movies, they're huge, big fellas, and they call them tiny, you know? And so I don't know how he did it or if it was, but I like to think of her as a fortress, because you think about how she stuck through everything. You know, that she was even, you know, from the cross, she even stayed with the body, Jesus' body, and she watched how it was laid in the tomb, is what the scriptures say. Isn't that amazing? She didn't like turn away from any of the hard things. And I think that I see her kind of in that as like a tower of strength. So I don't know, maybe it was just there were a lot of Marys. I mean, his mother's named Mary. It looks like maybe one of his aunts was named Mary. I mean, there were a lot of Marys. So maybe he just needed a way to identify that Mary. So he called her Mary Magdalene. Sometimes she refers to Mary the Magdalene. The way it says Mary called Magdalene. There's a whole thing with that too. So sometime we'll get into all the details, but I just wanted to share that little bit, that just, she's a brighter character, broader character than maybe we've thought of at times, because she just seems to appear in lists. And then she kind of appears at the resurrection. And that's kind of how we remember her, which is really powerful and wonderful. But you know, Jesus chose her. He chose her to be the one, to be the first eyewitness of the resurrection. And I think that says a lot. And we're going to go into some of that later this week too, maybe why he chose her. So whatever, tonight I wanted us to have some special time with a very special friend of mine. And Beth Brewster is going to be joining us in just a moment from New York City. She lives in the heart of New York City in Manhattan. And the truth is, we go way, way back. She's a dear friend. I was in her wedding. We moved to Savannah, Georgia together at one point. And she is the mother of my daughter's best friend too. So we have tons of connection and lots of history. But and I would have loved to have talked to her tonight, no matter what. But about this topic especially, I wanted Beth to talk with us. She's became a Christian when Steve and I were in New York. We planted the church in New York, and a little bit later she became a disciple, and she was a young woman, a triple threat is what we called her. You may not know what that means. Those in New York definitely know what that means. But she was a singer, actress, dancer, and let me tell you something, she does that and everything else. She can do anything. But you know, she became a Christian and really many years ago, and devoted her life. And she gave up a lot of dreams. Now, I don't know if she would say it that way, but that's how I look at it. She gave up a lot of dreams to pursue Jesus, his kingdom, to further his kingdom. And she's given her life to really loving the Bible and loving Jesus and surrendering. Her walk with God is powerful. It's dynamic. It's intimate. It's consistent. And I've watched her go through some of the hardest things that people go through in life, and yet she comes out loving God, ready to do whatever he wants her to do. And it kind of brings me to tears. I'm not going to cry. That he has now provided a way for her to be back in Manhattan and has restored some of those even early dreams to her. So she really does know that Jesus sees us, which is our theme tonight, that Jesus sees us, that he sees the real us, and Beth is as real as people come, and she has that relationship with Jesus, that connection, and she knows he sees her, and I love that. And she knows that too, that God will help us to be what we're meant to be in life. And so, Beth, I'm going to sort of turn this over to you, and if you would just share all your thoughts about this. Thank you.
I'd really like to meet this woman that you just described. Wow. I'm like, that's thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate all your kind words. And I mean, I've got a box of tissue right here just for myself, because anyone that knows me knows that I tend to get emotional quite easy. And first of all, thank you. Thank you for entrusting this inaugural episode with me. And I am happy if you want to at any time unmute and want to join in and comment, because because we go back so far, and because we've had such a long relationship and friendship. What I was hoping for tonight was just to do what you and I love to do, and that's to talk together, to share the things that we're learning from the scriptures. I love our deep spiritual talks. That is something that has defined our friendship and our relationship over the years, over the many, many, many years. I think about the first time that we met, I was like this bumbling, like 25-year-old kid who had her head in the clouds and just was emotionally all over the place, right? Which something that just popped out to me as you were sharing about Mary Magdalene was this idea of, and again, we don't know, why she was referred to as Mary Magdalene. The obvious choice, of course, is that's where she was from, Magdala. But, with Jesus, there's always kind of the surface meaning, and then there's a deeper meaning, right? And I love the idea, just as he called Peter rock, and, if you've read your Bible at all, or as you read your Bible, even if you're new to the scriptures, through the Gospels, you quickly see that Peter's anything but a rock in the beginning. And I think that's part of what I love about Jesus, is the vision that he has for us, and it ties into that idea of being seen, right? He sees who we were created to be deep down from the very beginning, not all of who we think we're supposed to be or should be, but who we really are deep on the inside. And I love that. Let's say that Magdalene is a nickname that Jesus gave her, right? And that it means fortress, tower. And the thing that I know about a fortress, what's the first thing I think about is it's stable. It's solid. A fortress is grounded. And how beautiful is that? Here was this woman who was I'm going to get choked up on this because I really relate. Here's this woman who was so unstable, right? So unstable. She has this encounter with Jesus. And he invites her to study with him, right? We always have to remember that Jesus is a rabbi, which women in Jewish culture, Jewish society, women were never invited to study with a rabbi. So just that alone, that Mary would be invited to learn from Jesus, to be taught by the rabbi, is extremely scandalous for that culture and that time. And it reminds me about how God chooses the unlikeliest people to form partnership with. And it's not the people who we, on the surface, typically think the obvious choices, right? And yet it's people like Mary that God chooses to partnership with. And I love how she goes from being unstable to stable. And for me, I just think about my own walk with God. You know, I had a lot of unsettling things happen in my life growing up, an extensive amount. And what it began to do, and I think at a young age, what I started to believe was that I was alone. I was alone in life. Like there really weren't a whole lot of people to count on. And I just wonder if Mary just felt so much like an outcast and alone. And yet she has this encounter with Jesus, who is all about the outcast, the unnoticed, the unlikely candidate, right? And I'm so grateful, because I even look at my own family and I think, you know, if you were going to choose somebody, you know, I was the irresponsible one, the reckless one, the, you know, leaped before she looked kind of person. I wasn't the stable. Oh, Beth's the logical one. You know, Beth's the one who, Beth's the planner. I mean, when I moved to New York, I was 24 years old. I sold the very few possessions that I had, and I got on a train with a suitcase and a trunk and $600 to my name, and I sort of knew two people. And that's kind of how I came to New York, right? I was homeless for a while. I kind of crashed on various couches. And I mean, you know, it's just a long story, and I'm not going to go into it all. But I will say that nobody would have defined me as, wow, this girl, she really plans, and then she really executes the plans well. But in spite of my fear of making a commitment to anything, because I just wasn't a person who ever stuck to anything, right? I was a quitter. That's how I would define my young, you know, like younger self. I just when things got difficult, I would quit. Right? I started taking horseback riding. The instructor yelled at me one time because I fell off the horse, and like I quit, right? Because quitting was just felt safer for me. I started swimming and was taking swimming, and the coach started to get really hard lined with me about improving and kind of really discipling me about my character and about my ethics. And of course, what did I do? Quit, because it got hard, right? It got hard. And I think just about, there are many examples in my life when that's just what I did. When things got difficult or challenging, I quit. And then the craziest thing happened to me. I met some women who wanted to share the Bible with me. So I studied the Bible, and I made the decision to be a Christian, and I have kept that commitment for 30 plus years. And that's really remarkable. I mean, I find that really, really remarkable. So I'm just saying, it's possible. It is possible for you to really change. And I just think about all the difficult things that God threw my way over the years. I mean, we've had financial struggles. We've had to deal with long-term illnesses, mental health issues, just lots of different things over the years. And I remember at one point in time just making the decision that I was going to stay faithful no matter what. No matter what. If God would just hang on to me, if God would just not let go of me. And, that decision has been tested many, many, many times. But I was thinking today, I was reading in Matthew. I'm in the book of Matthew right now, and I jumped ahead. And I was reading in Matthew 28, and the women, Mary Magdalene's with the women, they go, they're looking for Jesus, right? And he's not there, he's not in the tomb, but an angel comes and tells them what's happened. And so in Matthew 28, verse 8, it says, "So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples." And that really stuck out to me, afraid but filled with joy. And that really resounded or resonated with me right now because of the situation that we all find ourselves in globally. I know this word gets used a lot, but we're talking about, it's scary times, unsettling times, uncertain times. And there's a lot of loss going on. Things are changing faster than sometimes I think our brains are kind of trying to, catch up with everything that's going on. And it's okay. As a follower of Jesus, how am I going to, who am I going to be during this time? Like, what kind of woman am I going to be during this time? And I love that it says, afraid yet filled with joy. Because I think that there's room for both of those at the same time. And yeah, there's a lot that we could be afraid about right now. And there are times in life that, life just really stinks and we need to call it as it is. And not try to make it anything other than what it is. And yet, there are things I think that we can hold on to as disciples that can ground us. And therefore, we can have that joy. And the biggest thing that we have is the resurrection. That is the grounding truth that allows us to have joy. And I even think about, I find it curious, and I don't know if I'm the only one, although my daughter Mackenzie and I've had this conversation. I find it very curious that all of this is happening during springtime, right? Because spring is such a visual reminder to us all about hope and renewal and new, right? All we have to do is look outside and see the trees blooming and, the grass is getting green and there's these buds on the trees and, the robins and the blue jays and the cardinals are back out and we get to see this new life coming in. And so it's like we can look around and see evidence of hope and renewal And that helps me be grounded. That helps me go, oh, that's right. And I can find joy in nature. And I find even more joy now because that's the only thing we do get to do here in New York, right? Is that we get to go out. And I live on Fifth Avenue and 110th, and I'm right across the street from Central Park North. And inside Central Park is this amazing garden, these amazing gardens called the Conservatory Gardens. And it's well manicured. There's sculptures in there. It's just visually sumptuous. That's the best way I know how to describe it. It's just, oh, and I love to go there because it gives me just this glimpse of how magnificent God is when I'm there. And then I thought about how she's looking for Jesus. He's not where he's supposed to be. And I thought so much about how, one, maybe we've not read the Bible, or we've not really dug into the Gospels, and we're new to this kind of Jesus guy, and we're new to the Jesus story. And we're looking for Jesus, but he's just not who we think he is. And so it's this idea of, I want to find who Jesus is. I want to see who he really is. And then I think about how maybe some of us right now, it's hard for us to see God in this situation. It's hard for us to see Jesus. And yet, maybe he's not showing up the way we think he's supposed to, but that doesn't mean he's not showing up. And so part of that joy can be in being very intentional about looking for the ways that God is working, looking for Jesus in the most unexpected ways and places. Right. So you and I were talking last night a little bit, and I was sharing with you how I had gone out to the Conservatory Gardens, and I was walking around, and I was with Mackenzie, and we were praying, and then we're just really absorbing, trying to soak up all the, the sunshine, the beauty. And all of a sudden, I happened to look up in the tree, and there was this cardinal, this gorgeous, beautiful cardinal. Well, I happen to love cardinals. And for me, they're like a special, intimate little hug from God, like a little God wink. Like, Beth, I'm with you. I'm with you. And I just want to remind you of that. And, maybe you have your own thing. I don't know, but I happen to love cardinals. And it reminded me of this whole truth about how intimately God sees us, right? How incredibly special for Mary. Again, such an unlikely candidate to be chosen to be the first one for Jesus to reveal himself to. Like, her testimony didn't even count in her culture, in her world, right? Like, she had to go get the men, right? Her testimony needed to be substantiated. And I think sometimes we can forget in our modern culture, in our Western culture, the significance of that. Like, it's so significant. And we kind of just take it for granted. And I just love that, how intimately God sees us. He's looking for us, right? And he asks us to look for him. Are we willing to also look for him? this scripture led me to Romans chapter 12, so I'm going to turn over there. Romans chapter 12. I'm going to flip over there real quick. And I think Lisa made a mistake of just saying, just talk. just talk. And, you know, most of my friends, they get a little antsy and nervous when I stand up to share, when I make a comment at, you know, Bible discussion, everyone's like, uh-oh, Beth. But Romans 12, verse 12, isn't it interesting that it says, and the subtitle of that is love. It says, be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. And I think about how, you know, when difficult times hit, there's something about perseverance that I think God rewards. Because I think on the other side of perseverance is that hope. Your willingness to trust God when it doesn't even make sense. When sometimes it just feels like God is being silent. And maybe you are looking for him and you can't see him right now. You know, you're looking for, God, what are you doing? I don't get it. I don't understand it. And I've certainly been in those situations where, God, where are you in all of this? I'm struggling to see you. I'm struggling to find you. And yet, be joyful in hope. Afraid, yet joyful. Right? Afraid, yet patient in affliction. Faithful in prayer. And then something happens during that. Something happens when you decide to persevere. And I think it's a decision. You know, I think you have to practice hope, right? I think it's something that you have to be intentional about and you have to practice. But there's something about being willing that allows you to look beyond just yourself and helps you to become more aware of what other people are going through. That patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Because if you've ever persevered through something happens. It's that renewal on the other side of that. It's that change on the other side of that. Right? I mean, over in Romans 5, you know, the same message, I think, you know, God talks a lot about that too, where it's this idea of if you're willing to persevere, God's going to do something new, something different. There's going to be a shift. But you got to be willing to go through that time. You've got to be willing to, you got to be okay with the uncertainty. And know that God is not confused. He's not caught unaware. But if we will just decide to trust him when it makes no sense, right? Mary decided to trust him when it didn't make any sense to trust him. I think that that's just really, really amazing and powerful. And I don't know I don't know everybody's situation right now. And I don't know what everybody's going through. This month, for very personal reasons, has been a very challenging month for me personally. And yet, because, God's used it. I think one of my challenges, one of the things that I've discovered this last 2 years is that I often, there's a belief system I've held that's been foundational for me, and that is that I'm alone. I'm all alone in a situation. Like, and it's all up to me. And the thing that God has been so gracious and kind is he's used several different situations to show me that I'm not alone, right? And along the way, though, I've had to make some really scary decisions about being vulnerable and being open and deciding, what am I going to believe? Am I going to believe this old, this old behavior, this old belief, this old pattern of choices? Or am I going to believe what the Bible says? Am I going to believe God's story? Am I going to believe the truth? And it's been really challenging. But I've watched God remind me and show me that I'm not alone. But those decisions, those that are uncomfortable and are the fears that you don't want to say out loud because of the shame attached to them, or I don't know, maybe it's attached to a bad experience or how it makes you look. And then there's that pride that's attached to that. And, the embarrassment, maybe, especially I think if we've been disciples for a long time, we can have this I should know this by now. Like, I should have this on straight by now, so why am I struggling with this? I should know this now. And I really feel like what God has been teaching me is that it's all about, okay, now he's taken layer and layer and peeled away layer and layer. And now he's asking me, let's deal with the core. Let's deal with the deep down heart stuff. That's, I think, the absolute scariest things to deal with. But in order to get to that point, you've got to make those little decisions as you go. Deal with the sadness, deal with the grief, own it, say it, claim it. Be a sobbing mess for a day if you need to be a sobbing mess for a day. Say, oh my gosh, this is what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that if I tell you this, that you are going to not love me anymore, and that you're going to abandon me, and that I have to earn your love, or I have to protect myself. So I'm not going to let anybody in because that feels so safe to me. And Jesus says, no, no, that's not why I love you. I love you because you're good. I created you good, very good, and that you've made some choices that have deviated from my plan for you. And so I'm going to help you get back on track, not because you're this miserable, horrible person. No, because you're highly valued. And I love you just as you are. And I think as women, not just women, it's all of humanity, I don't want to say, but I do believe that women have some long-standing lies that we believe about ourselves, about who we think we're supposed to be, and all the things we think we should do. I'll be honest with you, when all this quarantine stuff happened, when Broadway shut down and all the television and movie productions shut down, and then people were like posting all of this, I just wrote this song, or I just wrote this poem, or I felt this incredible pressure of, oh no, I've got to create something amazing during this time. I can't waste this quarantine time. I've got to do something, I've got to paint, I've got to write music, I've got to, you know what I mean? I just felt, because I was comparing myself and feeling that worldly pressure of make the most of this opportunity. And so I thought, no,
you know what, God, I'm just going to be still. And if I feel inspired to do something, I'll know it's from you, and amen. That'll be awesome. If I don't feel inspired to do something, that's okay too. You love me, you accept me, and I'm valuable just because. And there's just this sense of peace that came with that.
I'm so grateful that you've shared so much. You've shared your heart. And I love how particularly that you've shared the vulnerabilities, like the things that we are probably each thinking or feeling, you know, I mean, and yet it all comes back to this relationship with him and this walking with him. And that's what I got out of what so much that you shared. One of my favorite things that you said was God kisses. And I do think that, you know, the other night you and I were talking, and you said, well, you know, maybe this thing about the cardinals and God kiss, you know, you didn't use the word God kisses. You just said maybe that's sort of a weird little thing, you know, whatever. And I was like, isn't that a relationship?
Yep.
Like, I mean, I do things that, for Steve, that are just kind of weird little things, or Skylar does things for me, or you with it's like that's what relationships are all about, just sort of being there, going through things together, and the little things and the big things, and the it doesn't have to all make sense. It doesn't have to all be really important events or ways that he's working in my life, but it's just, it's that walking every day, experiencing him, like being with him, having that walk with him that makes all the difference. And I think you're describing during this time, especially, how hard that is in some ways, because everything's disrupted, and change really is one of the things that people fear the most is change. It's like, even if something's not that great, we almost would choose it, psychologists tell us, over change. And I think that, and yet the whole world has changed. Like, just in a few days, 3 weeks ago, everything changed globally. So it's just, our fears, I think, are very warranted. I mean, as far as, you know, it's normal. It's very normal for us to be afraid. But then to know that as disciples, we've got Jesus, and he's there. And he's doing the little things, the big things. He's taking care of business, and he's taking care of us. That we're okay.
You know what? You just said something that made me, this whole thing about identity, right? And Mary, and kind of figuring out her identity. And when you were talking about change, I think that's why change can be so scary, because it's like, well, who am I going to be now?
Right.
You know, who am I going to be now that I don't have this job that has defined me?
Mm-hmm.
You know, who am I going to be now with this situation, and fill in the blank, that has defined me? And that's even those negative things that we don't necessarily like about ourselves, but we hang on to them because there's some sort of benefit for us. And sometimes I think the fear is we're not sure of who we're going to be without these things. And yet, Jesus is so reassuring, because he's going to walk us through what that new identity, and I don't even know it's a new identity. I really think that Jesus wants to help us go back to who we were originally created to be. Originally created to be. So it's not a new identity. It's just we've kind of piled on these identities that, you know, for very good reason.
He just thinks we're amazing. We're incredible.
Yes.
And I think that he cherishes us. And I think that we need to see that and feel that from him. But I think the only way to do that is to consistently walk with him and get to know him.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have a close relationship, it's hard to maintain that knowledge, that feeling, that understanding that he adores me.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what we need, though. We need it all the time, but especially during times like this when we're not sure who to be or who we're supposed to be or what we're doing or who I am anymore, what the world's going to be like when this is over. And yet when we find ourselves in him, in like our identity in him, we're safe.
We are
and
very
we're
safe.
beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And we're exactly how he wanted us to be. Now, we're not perfect, but that's why he died. So he took care of all of that so that we can be and keep becoming what we were really created to be. So I love that. I think that that's exactly what we need. And I think that helps us stay calm. You are my most fun person I know. That's really true. You are more fun than any person I know. And sorry to those people that thought you were. But no, I think that. And I think God it was a gift he gave me because I needed you. Like, this has been so much fun to talk and to visit and to listen to you really even proclaim Jesus and proclaim how he works. And that's just it's been wonderful and so powerful.
Thank you for letting me be your guinea pig.
Oh, really? This is my first. So you definitely are my guinea pig, but you were perfect for that because you helped me be calm and figure out. Anyway, this is great. And you're of course great on camera, but I'm just very, very thankful for this time. And especially, I know everybody says they've got time, but I don't exactly get that. It seems like there's twice as much to do, but I think that, during this time, being in New York and there being such sort of pain and fear all around you, especially, that I think that I am especially grateful for you to donate this time to us and to me. And I'm grateful in a lot of ways. I was afraid that you were there. Honestly, I was like, why are they in New York at first? And I realized that New York was going to be the hot spot or whatever. And yet I thought, I'm glad you're there because right now, New York.
Oh,
sorry, I'm going to cry. I thought I would get through this, but New York needs your light. They need Jesus, and you are a good reflector. And I'm glad that you're there to reflect his light of hope. I love New York. I love the city, and I love the church there. But I am so grateful that you're there because you will reflect his light to the people around you when you're able to get out and people be with you. So anyway, which I don't know exactly how that's working. It's great.
Well, Lisa, I love you dearly. I love Steve. I love McCall and Skylar, your mama, Buzz. I love your family. And, Portland just will always have a really special place in my heart, not just because you guys are there, but just the kindness and the generosity that the Portland church extended to, our daughter Mackenzie at a very challenging time for her in her life. And I'm just really grateful. So this has extra special meaning to be able to share and have this moment with you. And so I feel very honored and grateful.
But I love you.
I love you.
There. And I will be in touch, okay? Okay.
Bye from New York.
There it is. Bye-bye, sweetie. I wanted to tell everybody that we're going to be doing this again tomorrow night. And we'll have Nadine Templer coming to join us. And I'm so thankful that she will be with us. A lot of you know her. She's from Hope, and you've been on Hope Youth Corps with her. You've been, some of you on volunteer corps, and she's very inspiring. So tomorrow night she's going to come join us. And actually, Mary Magdalene is her favorite character in the Bible, and always has been. So I think that's really cool that that it just worked out that way. So she's going to come and share tomorrow evening. But then also we will have every night this week at 7 o'clock. If you'll tune in, we will have a time together to talk, to really reflect on Jesus and his love that we can see, especially in how he loved Mary Magdalene and how it gave her hope. Her whole story is incredibly full of hope. So, so hopefully we will see you later in the week. Particularly, we're hoping you tune in on Friday evening. Friday evening, we're going to celebrate, and Dion Davis is our speaker. And we're going to celebrate. I have seen the Lord, she proclaimed. That's our theme, and our theme for Friday night. And so come and join us in a time of live worship, fellowship, a time to really celebrate. It'll be our Good Friday devotional. Thank you. Good night.